Welcome to the deep dive. So you're interested in exploring Uptown Minneapolis. Well, you've come to the right place.
Yep, we're going to unpack this really vibrant area for you today.
Think of this as your essential guide. We've gathered all sorts of info, the history, the cool buildings, how to get around, basically the stuff you'd want to know.
Exactly. We've looked at historical records, architectural details, some personal stories, even, the transit situation. It's a pretty broad picture we're aiming for.
Right. And the goal here is simple. Give you, the listener, a really engaging overview of Uptown. Its past, its highlights, the quirky facts.
So whether you're actually planning a trip out there or you're just curious about Minneapolis neighborhoods, this should be pretty useful.
Absolutely. Ready to jump into Uptown?
Let's do it. So maybe the first thing to tackle is the name itself, Uptown, south of downtown Minneapolis, which might make you scratch your head a bit.
Right. It feels a little backwards. But there's a reason. It actually goes back to 1929.
Oh, 1929. What happened then?
Well, the local business folks in what was mostly called the Hennepin Lake area back then, they wanted to give the district a bit more, punch, a brand identity.
Ah, branding. And where did they get the idea for Uptown?
Get this, Chicago. Chicago had this booming, successful uptown district.
Ah, interesting. So they borrowed it.
Pretty much. They saw Chicago's uptown thriving and thought, hey, let's try that here. They wanted to position Hennepin Lake as this major commercial spot.
That makes sense. A bit of strategic naming.
And they didn't just decide it in a meeting room. They made a big public splash.
So?
They took the Lagoon Theater, which was a big deal locally, and in April 29, they renamed it the Uptown Theater.
Wow. Okay, so they literally put Uptown up in lights. That's a statement.
Bold move, right.
Yeah.
And then, through the 1930s, other businesses started adding Uptown to their names, too. It sort of snowballed.
So the theater renaming kicked it off. But did everyone just immediately start calling it Uptown?
Well, that's the interesting part. Apparently not. Even though the branding effort was there, sources say lots of locals and even city plans kept calling it Hennepin Lake for decades.
Really? For how long?
It seems like Uptown only really became the main common name, maybe in the late 80s or early 90s.
Oh. So branding takes time to really sink in sometimes. Good to know if you're exploring the name itself has history.
Definitely. So knowing the name story is one thing, but what about the actual history? How did this spot even develop?
Right, let's rewind way back.
Yeah.
Hennepin Avenue, the main drag, wasn't always a busy street.
Oh, what was it?
Originally, it was actually a footpath used by the Dakota people. A really important route connecting St. Anthony Falls with Boyd-Makaska, what many knew as Lake Calhoun.
Wow, okay, so its importance as a travel path goes back centuries before the city.
Exactly. And in the early days of Minneapolis, the area itself was pretty different. Some houses, yeah, but also things like farms, ice houses, cutting ice from the lakes.
More spread out, less dense.
Definitely. And Hennepin Avenue itself was designated a parkway for a while.
A parkway. What did that mean for development?
It basically meant it had a more residential, less commercial focus initially. Kept things a bit quieter.
So when did things start to, ramp up and become more like the uptown people know now?
The big shift seems to have started around 1900. That's when the parkway designation on Hennepin was lifted.
Ah, okay. So that opened the door for more development.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And right around then, you also get the streetcars coming in and expanding. That was huge for accessibility.
Streetcars.
Right.
That always changes things.
Totally. Better access meant more people, more business, and that led to bigger commercial buildings going up in the 1910s and 20s. Things really started getting denser.
Was it just businesses moving in, or was the community growing too?
Oh, the community was definitely growing. You see things like Calhoun School and West High School being built in that era. They needed places for all the kids from families moving in.
So it was becoming both a place to live and a place to shop and work. Makes sense.
Exactly. That mix is still part of his character today.
You mentioned streetcars. That whole era is fascinating. How central were they to Uptown's development, really?
Oh, incredibly central. You have to think about Thomas Lowry and his vision for the streetcar system.
The guy behind the Minneapolis Streetcar Company.
Yep. He saw streetcars as the way to connect everything: homes, parks, businesses. The lines basically dictated where growth happened. Uptown was right in the path of that growth.
Which lines were key for Uptown specifically?
The Como-Harriet line was a big one. It came right into Uptown at Hennepin and Lagoon, went south on Hennepin through the main business area,
Okay.
and then down at Hennepin to Lake, it connected with other major lines like the Selby Lake line that went all the way to St. Paul. So it was a real crossroads.
Wow, that's some serious connectivity back then. Can you still see any traces of that today if you're walking around?
You actually can. It's pretty neat. If you go behind St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church near Blythe Makaska,
Yeah.
you can sometimes spot the old streetcar rails still embedded in the ground.
No way. That's a cool little hidden detail, a physical link to the past.
Exactly. A reminder of how people moved around and how the neighborhood was shaped.
So when did the streetcars stop running through Uptown?
The whole Minneapolis streetcar system ended in 1954. Buses took over, seemed more modern and flexible at the time.
End of an era. Okay, let's shift to some landmarks. The Uptown Theater has to be top of the list, right?
Absolutely iconic. We mentioned it started as the Lagoon in 1916 and got the Uptown name in 29. But it also had this major rebirth after a fire,
A fire, when was that?
1939. And when they rebuilt it, they went with that very distinctive streamlined modern style.
Yeah, that tall tower is unmistakable.
Totally. That 60-foot tower with the rotating light beam. Apparently it was so tall and bright they needed FAA approval back then.
Seriously, aviation authorities, that's wild.
Yeah, first three-sided vertical sign like that in the country, supposedly. It really stood out. Still does.
And it wasn't just the building, right? It had a real cultural legacy. Movies, Rocky Horror.
Oh, for sure. Decades of classic films, indie stuff, and yeah, those legendary midnight Rocky Horror screenings. It was a huge part of the scene.
But it closed down for a bit recently, didn't it?
It did. Closed in 2020.
Yeah.
But good news for anyone planning a visit. It reopened in June 2023.
Oh, fantastic. That's what, still movies.
Now it's primarily a music and event venue.
Yeah.
And they restored that amazing sign too. So the landmark lives on, just with a new focus.
That's great to hear. New life for an old icon. Okay, another big spot is 7 Points, though people might remember it as Calhoun Square.
Right. That opened back in 1984. Very much that sort of 80s mall style with the atrium.
Oh, was it popular right away?
It had its critics. There was actually a neighborhood campaign called Dump Up Dale opposing it. Shows that development can sometimes cause friction.
And the name Calhoun Square, that became controversial later on.
Exactly. John C. Calhoun, the namesake, was a major defender of slavery. So after the lake nearby was renamed Blythe Makaska, and with general awareness
The
growing,
name felt out of step.
pretty much. So in 2020, the owners changed it to 7 Points.
Why 7 Points?
It refers to that pointy sign on top of the building. A much more neutral, descriptive name.
Makes sense. So what's the plan for 7 Points now? Is it still just a mall?
The vision is more mixed use. Retail, yes, but also offices, maybe apartments. They've talked about adding things like an outdoor plaza, a market, trying to make it more of a community hub again.
Interesting. So it's evolving too. Now we've talked specific buildings, but what about just the general feel, the architecture on the side streets?
Yeah, if you wander off Hennepin and Lake into the residential areas, you definitely see the history there.
What styles stand out?
Because Uptown really boomed in the early 20th century. You see a lot of houses from that era. Think Craftsman bungalows, American Four Squares. Those were super popular then.
So the houses kind of reflect that period when the streetcars were running and the neighborhood was really taking off?
Exactly. The architecture tells that story of growth.
Okay, so if someone's listening and thinking, all right, I want to check this place out, how easy is it to get to Uptown?
It's actually really conveniently located just southwest of downtown, easy access from major highways like 35W, 94, 394. Getting there by car is pretty simple.
What about transit? If you don't want to drive.
Also good options. The Uptown Transit Center is a hub for a bunch of Metro Transit bus routes.
Okay.
And don't forget the Midtown Greenway. That's fantastic for biking or walking right into the heart of Uptown, totally separate from traffic.
Oh yeah, Greenway's great. And parking, if you do drive, is it a nightmare?
Well, street parking exists, but it can be tight. There are several ramps though, the 7 Points ramp, the walkway ramp, Mosaic Art Park, Uptown Row. So there are options besides circling the block.
Good to know. Finally, what's the vibe like these days? People talk about how Uptown has changed.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. You hear stories for people who remember it being more bohemian or independent, maybe. Some feel it became more corporate for a while. But honestly, things seem to be shifting again. Like we said, the Uptown Theater reopening as a music venue, that's bringing a different kind of energy back.
So maybe it's in a bit of a transition phase?
Could be. It feels like there's new stuff happening alongside the established places.
Yes.
Dynamic. Still figuring itself out, maybe.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive on Uptown, what are the main things to keep in mind if you're heading out there?
Well, definitely remember the name Uptown was a deliberate choice, a branding thing inspired by Chicago. Don't forget its deep roots. back to that Dakota footpath
Right, the long history.
and how the streetcars really shaped its growth. Plus, those key landmarks.
Yeah.
The theater, 7 Points, they have stories too, and they're still evolving.
It's a place of layers.
Exactly. Hopefully this gives you a good starting point for exploring those layers yourself.
And maybe something to think about as you walk around. Given how much Uptown has already changed and reinvented itself over the decades, what do you think its next chapter will look like? How will today's changes shape the experience there tomorrow?
That's a great question. How will that blend of history and whatever comes next play out? It's definitely a neighborhood that doesn't stand still.
Food for thought. So we absolutely encourage you to go check out Uptown for yourself, see the sights, feel the energy, and maybe discover your own little piece of its ongoing story. Happy exploring.